is an indescribable miracle given what's happened to the people of this region over that century. But as Granny MacDonald said, and she displayed at this fair for 70 years and at fairs before this one, the exhibition shows what can happen when people take an interest and work together. On this episode of Pioneers and Places, with the help of Shirley Campbell, we tell you some of the stories of the history of the Interior Provincial Exhibition. Welcome to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with you, and today we're going to tell just a great story, and there is a great book that you can kind of follow along with our story. Shirley Campbell is my storyteller, and you're also the author of Our Fair, the Interior Provincial Exhibition, Its First 100 Years.
Yes.
This is a work. I mean, you have a lot of people working with you on this book.
This was a team effort, a volunteer effort by the Armstrong Spell Machine Museum and Art Society in honor of the centennial of the fair.
Yeah, and it is an award winner. It was recognized for its advocacy of the fair.
And of the community.
Yeah.
By the British Columbia Heritage Society.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You should be justifiably proud. We have to then go back 100+ years in order to sort of get a grasp on this thing. So 1898, how many people are living in the Armstrong Spell Machine area?
Well, probably there were 1,000 or 2,000 people in the Spell Machine municipality. Armstrong still wasn't incorporated as a separate town. It didn't happen until 1913, so it was a rural municipality at that time.
Not many people, but all involved in agriculture.
Yes, the Spell Machine Valley is a most beautiful valley and capable of diverse agriculture. You can hay and grain and cattle and horses and sheep and pigs. You can grow anything you want. And of course the women were there waiting to use the products in cooking and canning and sewing and weaving and tatting and crocheting. And they were going to be a fair within a fair when it got up and running.
Yeah. The whole idea of a fair, I mean, it's a social thing. I mean, you've been, working like fiends, getting the thing planted and raised and everything. So a fair is a social event, but it's also an educational event.
It was an educational event because the farmers and the settlers who'd come had brought with them their favorite ideas of varieties of fruit and vegetables and breeds of horses and cattle.
From wherever they came.
From wherever they came, mainly from Britain and Europe. But when they got to the Okanagan, it wasn't necessarily the place to have these types of products. So they needed a fair in order to be able to see what would grow well, so that they could grow the similar things and increase their general well-being.
There was a good competitive streak in these people. They liked to put up their best against someone else's best.
There was definitely a competitive streak. They loved all kinds of competitive games as well, horse races, the pride of having the best livestock or the best vegetables or whatever it was. There was a strong streak of competition.
And the fair was a bit later in those days. We're right around Labor Day these days, but it was in October then.
And that was because they needed, of course, to get the harvest in, and they needed to do the fall seeding. Before they could start to play, they had to finish their work. And therefore the fair was often middle of October or later, which was a problem because of the frost coming sometimes and cutting down the best products that they wanted to bring in.
Oh, that must have been the source of some anger.
Yes, certainly, and that's why they had to gradually move it closer.
And it started off reasonably simply.
Yes.
You called it, what, a tabletop fair?
Yes, it was called a tabletop fair. It was a room full of fruit and vegetables in a room in one of the stores that wasn't being used. And down in the street, they tethered their horses and their cattle, and that was the one-day event in which it began.
And there would be hundreds of animals tethered in the street.
That's right, and it was pulling and shoving on the hitching rail and huge noise and probably great dirt as a result of it. And it wasn't a very satisfactory situation, but it was the best at the time.
Didn't stay that way for long. When did sort of a fair grounds be identified
For about 10 years before 1900, the farmers had been petitioning the Spell Machine Council for money to buy a fairgrounds, but the council castigated them for wanting to spend it on frippery instead of on roads and culverts. So finally, 10 men from the local area got together, paid $100 each, and bought the 7 acres, which are the eastern edge of the present site.
That is a lot of money for someone at the turn of the century to come up with, $100 a piece.
It was a lot of money, and as a matter of fact, they weren't able to pay it all off. So in 1905, when the fair had proved a success, Armstrong Council took title to that deed of land and paid off the remainder.
Were they always this impetuous or this determined? I mean, they won't buy our fair force, we'll do it ourselves. Is that kind of take charge kind of attitude evident elsewhere?
That take charge attitude was there from the very beginning. For example, between Armstrong and Enderby, there was a huge swamp caused by the overflow of Davis Creek and Deep Creek.
They called actually Armstrong, what were they, island in the swamp?
That's what it was, a few acres of higher ground in the middle of a swamp. So Donald Graham and a group of the farmers in 18 days built the back Enderby Road along the base of Aberdeen Mountain so that they could avoid the swamp when they were taking their grain to the flour mill in Enderby.
They just took the bull by the horns, as they say, and did it.
And did it.
18 days, that is a lot of road to build in a short time.
It was, but it was essential because they were marooned in a sense up on Lansdowne, which was a bit of higher ground 3 miles away from the island in the swamp, and they needed to get to the flour mill because there wasn't one in Armstrong at the time.
They drained the swamp, and that's what gave you some of the great soil for the great agricultural harvest.
That's right. Once the railway was built, the S&O branch, which incidentally was built caused by local people getting together, such as Vernon and Lumbee and the men, Vernon and Lumbee and Andrew Mara and several others, and they created the conditions for building that branch line. And that meant then that Armstrong was going to be the center because that's where the track went. So Lansdowne just picked up its village and moved it down to Armstrong, another example of the do-or-die attitude.
Pretty audacious types too, because in 1905 you picked up the whole fair and took it to New Westminster.
That's right. They had drained that swamp because they needed to now that they'd moved the town.
Yeah.
And they had acres of this beautiful, rich land that was revealed for cabbages and carrots and potatoes and celery by the ton. And so they then had all of the produce necessary to show. That's right. And 1905 was a wonderful time to do it because it was the Dominion Fair, and it was going to be down in New Westminster.
This must have, I don't know, that is a big thing to chew off and head down because you're taking a risk. Do we look small? Do we look amateurish? But you didn't.
No. Armstrong's Spell Machine could have been part of an Okanagan exhibit, which was being suggested by Vernon. But Armstrong Spell Machine felt strong enough to do it on their own. So they took down a wonderful statue of made of wheat, grains of wheat, a woman, Our Lady of the Fields, and her robes were vegetables and fruit flowing out on both sides. And over her head in electric light in 1905, colored electric light, was Armstrong. And they came third in this Dominion Fair, 43 points behind the winner.
What a great start. Now, there is a man by the name of Hassan who figures prominently in this project, and we're going to come back after this break and talk about him, okay? We'll be back with more on the IPE after these words. Welcome back to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Shirley Campbell telling you the story of the Interior Provincial Exhibition. Wasn't named that yet. It's got about 4 different names before it finally became that, but that was its start. 1906, the year after you did so well in the Dominion Fair in New Westminster, that's what stimulated you to start building at the fairgrounds.
It became essential to have a place to exhibit, especially their fruit and vegetables. and so they built the Agricultural Hall in 1906. And then, of course, they still had no place for the livestock. They had the grounds, but they didn't have the buildings. And that came about in 1912, after a disastrous fair in 1911, because the farmers tended to stay home. They couldn't drive their animals in for one day and drive them home again and have no place to put them. And so they needed to build this barn.
I remember a newspaper story just being scathing about the lack of attention in that 1911 year.
That's right.
But the barn was built.
Palatial stables.
Palatial?
Palatial stables is what the Armstrong Advertiser called it. 200 feet long, and the following year, Price Ellison, who was a member of the legislature, presented $2,500, which was matched by Spell Machine Council, to put an extension on it. So livestock were there to stay in a big way.
And this is about the era when Matt Hassan arrives.
Yes.
That's why we have the Hassan Arena, Hassan Insurance. When I see him in this picture, he's a third bigger than everybody else in the shot. Tell me about Matt Hassan.
Well, he loved his job, for one thing, as manager of the fair. He became manager 1913, and he and his son were managers of the fair until 1972.
Cool.
That whole period gave an enormous stability to the fair because it was consistent philosophy, consistent management, consistent planning, and it gave Armstrong a leg up in terms of other fairs that might have been happening in the area.
Now, the kind of miracle is that this guy who's kind of larger than life and reasonably ebullient, you know,
Yes.
he's Irish and
Yes.
but he didn't cow people. People came to him. He saw a vision and people espoused it.
The vision for him was that this fair was going to be an agricultural fair, that it was going to be educational so that people could see the best and nobody was kept out, no matter how large the entry was in terms of show animals that might make the circuit and come to Armstrong. Everybody was welcome because the farmers here had to see the best in order to improve their own quality of life.
There were some other visionaries here, and we've got a picture of Dunwaters, the Laird of Fintry.
Yes.
He had his experimental paradise at Fintry.
He did.
And he brought his Ayrshires to the Armstrong Fair.
Yes. He was a force for almost 30 years, between 1920 and 1950. And he sponsored many Ayrshire shows. At one point in 1930, there were 130 Ayrshires that he had enticed from 6 outside competitors to bring to the show to show how wonderful Ayrshires were as milk and butter producers. And he also gave an Ayrshire, purebred Ayrshire calf to the junior farmers in an auction for the calf club. And these animals often became the basis of the herd of the child that had won it.
And when you begin to talk about these animals, I mean, we've got a Jersey cow here from the 20s that had nearly 16,000 pounds of milk in a 303-day year.
Yes.
16,000 pounds of milk. That doesn't even count the butter and everything else that it produced.
That's right.
But she had a name.
Pretoria Oxford Janet was the calf that was the last calf in the draw. Foster Whitaker belonged to the Jersey Calf Club. He was away from school the day that the draw was made, and he was left with the leftover. And the leftover was Pretoria Oxford Janet. And when she freshened, she produced so much milk that he had to run home from school at noon in order to give her the third milking. And he became a long-distance runner, and she became the national Canadian, the national world champion Jersey milk producer.
That is right here in the Okanagan,
That's right.
In Spalmsheen.
That's right.
Now, there was a Holstein that followed along a few years later that
That's right.
also was remarkable. The Ayrshires were remarkable. And you mentioned this student farmers.
That's right.
This was more than, this helped extend the herds and extend the species, didn't it, in chickens and pigs and everything else?
The junior farmers were created shortly after World War I. They were supported by the schools. The schools often dispersed the chicks when the boxes arrived from the Ministry of Agriculture for the children to take home in the school bus with them.
They'd take home a box of living chicks.
That's right, squeaking and chirping and scrabbling around in the boxes. And the swine clubs, when the farmers needed more swine production, they would form the clubs in the schools, and they had absolutely no difficulty doing it. So the schools were a strong support. And then the farmers themselves, they provided workshops for the youth in their clubs. And they would invite them to their farms, all the different kinds of farms, and they would show them the best, how to judge the products, how to care for the products, whether it was livestock or other. And the women would cook bountiful lunches for them, and everyone went home happy. But this support of the schools, the parents, and interested farmers, and the IPE, and the fitting in with the philosophy of agriculture, it made the 4-H, as they became in the 50s, a very, very important part of the fair.
Now, the fact that the CPR was there, also, and the fact that they were encouraged to participate in the fair and stuff, they offered free trips to the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto for winners in Armstrong.
That's right.
That had a huge effect on at least one young guy.
Yes. We have a picture of Dennis Lister and Bernice McCallan, who were winners at the IPE. Then they went on to win at the Pacific National Exhibition, the PNE, and then they went to win the national competition at the Royal Winter Fair in swine judging. And that was not an unusual thing to happen. The 4-H from the Valley, and particularly from Armstrong Small Machine, did enormously well because of the training that they had received over those many, many years.
And I have to take a break, but we come back because, I mean, a fair, even under the tutelage of somebody with a great vision as Matt Hassan, is going to encounter a problem or two, and we'll talk about that when we come back after this break. Welcome back to Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts talking with Shirley Campbell, author of the book Our Fair, The First 100 Years, and with Matt Hassan and son in the driver's seat. This fair survived fires, depression, wars. Really quite a remarkable testament to how dedicated the people of the Small Machine were to this fair.
It was their primary concern with them, a primary institution. During these adverse times that you mentioned, they seemed to put more effort into it than ever before. For example, the entertainment, during the Depression, they had a rodeo with wild cow milking and wild steer races. They had husky dogs to pull children around. They had provincial championships for tug of war. They had lacrosse finals and middleweight championships in wrestling.
Boxing, yeah.
In wrestling, they did the more difficult the scene was, the harder people seemed to work in order to make it continue.
You know, I wonder how a fair can survive World War I and World War II and a depression. I mean, in World War I, nearly all of the young men were gone.
And that's where the wives and the children took up the slack. And we have examples of the children bringing their animals to the fair. And we have the schools saying that high school entry in September would be 2 weeks late in order to allow the harvesting to go on in the absence of the fathers by the youth of the local people.
It's just such overwhelming because the kids must have taken on such a sense of responsibility doing man's work.
That sense of responsibility was encouraged by the 4-H movement and by their success at the judging and the exhibiting that they did. The Okie Swenson Trophy, for example, is the sterling 4-H trophy, which was a bequest by an unmarried Small Machine man who died in the 30s and left $4,000 to support the 4-H movement. And that money was used to pay for midway rides and workshops because Spalmachine Council invested their share in bonds, and so it still survives.
Other shields, like the Dewar shield. I mean, who was Dewar, and why were these so? Why was this particular shield so valuable to heavy horse owners, for example?
Well, the heavy horses were such an essential part of the economy. The heavy horses were the ones that were needed to drag the grain to the flour mill and to do the logging and all of these.
To build that road.
And to build that road, that's right.
And so that shield is a memento of a historical component of the IPE, and the Spalmachine. It's precious.
It's precious, and there are many, many trophies. There are trophies around of great interest because they go so far back and so far forward.
And when you think of a trophy, you know, it's the sum of that calf becoming the milk cow, that bull becoming the sire of the herd. It is a legacy.
Yes, it's a legacy, and it's from grandparents to parents to children that has occurred over and over and over again in Armstrong and Spalmachine and in the Okanagan that have created the circumstances for this survival of the IPE.
There was a time in the 70s when the fair had a bit of a problem. I mean, it was compressed into a small spot and people thought it needed to move out.
Yes, for about 10 years between 1975 and 1985, there was a great debate about whether the fair should move to its own location. And it was because there were other groups, of course, now occupying the grounds and using the grounds during the year. There was the problem of who was responsible for maintaining all these buildings, who was responsible for getting the grants, and so forth. And these problems seemed so onerous that they decided to try to move away. And the executive in 1981 bought a piece of property on Pleasant Valley Road to move to. Unfortunately, they couldn't get it out of the agricultural land freeze, and therefore they had spent all this money and could not use the land. Furthermore, the barn started to disintegrate because the swamp was causing the roof to separate from the walls and the concrete blocks to have great spaces. And these odd things, awful things were happening. But at the same time, in 1982, it became a Class A fair. In other words, the fair had gone on and got bigger and better. Despite all these problems, they were still producing a wonderful fair.
And I mean, with that kind of debt hanging over your head, that could have been the end of it, but everybody saw the value of keeping the fair going, so everybody worked together instead of working apart.
That's right. In 1985, they came to the conclusion that the fair belonged in Armstrong, that studies had shown that when you move a fair away from its roots, you lose the support of the people. And so they decided to stay in Armstrong, and they went full tilt ahead with construction in order to create everything they needed for a good agricultural fair. All of the horse barns, the agriplex, the horticultural building, new grandstands, rings for the demonstrations of the light horse in all their glory. This was the solution, plus changing the aspects as needed of agriculture in order to make it a very entertaining and educational show.
And the fact that you've got tens of thousands of urbanites coming to this rural fair, yes, and just loving it.
Over 90,000 people now come to the fair on a regular basis.
Thank you very much for telling us the story of the IPE, the Interior Provincial Exhibition, over 100 years in Spalmachine, in Armstrong.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Shirley Campbell, author of the book, our storyteller tonight. See you next time on Pioneers and Places.